Grand Rising, everybody. Grand Rising, how you doing? This is your Coach Renz, and today, starting a little bit late, just like I had said that we would. I had some family things to take care of, but we are here. We are here, and we are back to our conversations where we are going to break down the ancient Mesopotamian religion, so that we can understand how it was a great influence on the Abrahamic religions and how they're all polytheistic. So if you find me for the first time, go to about 5 minutes. That's when we're really going to get started, as I get time for people to get on, because this is a live that we normally start around 10 o'clock, Monday through Friday. I am also the owner of Smoking Phoenix Cigar Lounge, so I am getting my cigar ready for this conversation. I do love to have your comments, but please share the video. Even after the fact, share it. This is going to be a very informative video, so I hope that you will watch it over and over again so that you will be able to absorb all this information that we're going to talk about. And as we go through it, please draw your conclusions as to how you can see these influences in what we call religion today and throughout time. So we'll give people a few minutes to get on, and then we're going to continue. So as you come on, love to meet you and greet you. So let me know you're here. It's been a good day today. We're going to have a great day today. We're going to have a great weekend. But every day is a great day. So, and remember, when you share the videos, and I see that you are a sharer, you request videos, and they will more than likely be made, because I love my sharers. Love the sharers. So let me know when you get on. See, we have a few people popping on right now. We're streaming on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. We will probably stop around 2, as I have some errands that I need to run. Gotta go get some more cigars, some new cigars that we sell. So I look forward to going to pick up cigars and a couple of new ones that we haven't sold before. So I get some new cigars for me to try. But I know they're going to be good because they're Placencias. How we doing? People are clicking on. We're going to start here in about 2 minutes. So I look forward to this conversation. Where we're going to talk about ancient Mesopotamia and the deities that they worship and how religion grew. I am cheating a little bit. You got me a little sheet here so I can say the names of these deities correct, because that's the hardest part for me. Grand Rising Debbie, how you doing? Out of Texas. Texas is in the house. I haven't seen my Australians and South Africans lately. Gotta get my Australians and South Africans and my Germans back on here. Grand Rising Raquel. You know, I like us being international. I like the international flavor. Keep growing the channel. Please continue to share the channel. Share the channel. Share every video, especially if you're on Facebook and YouTube. Share the videos. That's how we grow. That's how we build our tribe. And we keep growing that way. Yes, I've heard of the flying spaghetti monster. He's on Saturn, right? The flying spaghetti monster is on Saturn. Grand Rising James. We're going to go much deeper into talking about more of the origins of Anunnakis, instead of just, and how they developed and how the religion developed. Oh yeah, the spaghetti monster is valid. It's funny. Love the spaghetti monster. I love, he probably speaks of Italian, All right, we are about to get full steam ahead. in this conversation about ancient Mesopotamia and how it influenced the Abrahamic religions that we have today. And we can still see a lot of those influences in how we live. So, welcome everybody. Grand Rising, Steve. Yes, thank you for the compliment, sir. So we are going to, today we were going to discuss the ancient Mesopotamian religions and how they influenced the Abrahamic religions. As we go through some of the genealogy of it and the history of it, we will segue into different aspects and how we still see these things that were prevalent in the formation of the Abrahamic religions, and then so on and so forth. Grand Rising Brett, St. Kitts. I always pronounce that other word wrong. And Nevis. So Grand Rising we got our 60, 59 degree nights here. You still chilling with the warmth of the Caribbean. So jealous. But so what do you guys think if you was grading your knowledge of the ancient Mesopotamia, the deities of it on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being super expert, where would you say that you are in relation to that? What do you think your knowledge base? Where would you place yourself? As you've never heard of it, all the way up to you studied it so much that you can recant most of the tales and stories and mythologies, by heart. If I gave myself a number, because there's so much information concerning this subject matter, I would probably put myself around a 6.57 range, right? Grand Rising, Angelina, how you doing? Really, did you know? Did you know, really? So by that, I am no means an expert to the point where this is something that I've just studied so much that, I know it like the back of my hand, but I'm pretty dang good at it, very knowledgeable of it, have enough information, enough knowledge concerning this that I can see the immense evidence of how these religions developed and influenced the Abrahamic religions, and how none of these religions are polytheistic or monotheistic. I might have said that wrong in the description. That's a curiosity of mine right now. Oh, yeah, all of them are polytheistic. So I'm waiting for some zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I was hoping to see some people let me know like where your knowledge base is. That would help me to know as far as how deep in details or how much I need to start out. But let's just start out as if everybody is at 0 right now. But I am curious to know where each individual person who's communicating, where you are in this subject matter. Oh, Debbie's a 5. All right. That's what I'm talking about. 5 is a very good place to be. Very good place to be. So for those who are at the 0 level, let's start out with the very basics. The very basics is what and where is Mesopotamia? Mesopotamia is sometimes called the cradle of civilization. It's called the first civilization. It is not the first civilization as we have discussed before, but it is the most popular, most well-known birthplace of civilization, mainly because our societies today has went through the process of growth and development and historicity coming out of this area into the all the way up to the Roman Empire and how that has influenced the entire world. So although it is not the first civilization, it is one of the primary civilizations that we have the most knowledge about. Now, one of the reasons why we have this knowledge concerning Mesopotamia, but you can stretch it all the way through China, India, North Africa is because of their writings and where they are, and because of their geography and what is it called out there, environment. A lot of their information have been, it was saved, it was preserved by the earth. So we do have a lot of information concerning them, whereas in other wet areas, information, societies, structures, they decay a lot faster. So we don't have as much information about those ancient civilizations. We are not in a situation where we have everything about these situations, about these civilizations. We have most of the information we have is more than likely written by the elites, constructed by the elites. So the perspective of everything that we know, of most of the things that we know, is not all the way down to the base level person, but it's mostly for the upper class people, right? It was okay, but I missed the teaching. The theft came. I do pause and read comments. So if I pause, it's because I'm reading a comment. I'm more into ancient Egypt, but your outlook is enlightening to when it comes to the origin and patriarchalism. We'd love to hear more about it, and also differences in these ancient civilizations. I'm writing from Israel, by the way. Outstanding, sir. We're about Israel. I have visited many places in Israel. I actually really enjoy Israel. I love Israel. Did a lot of good partying in Tel Aviv in Israel. Great food. Street food is amazing in Israel. But y'all know I can get off into travel tangents. So let's try not to do that today. So Mesopotamia is that area in and around near Israel. It's literally called the land between two rivers. And those two rivers being the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers. This will mostly encompass your Iraq, Kuwait, almost to Iran, those areas. This is the majority of the area that was called Mesopotamia, Fertile Crescent, because these two rivers provided life. They provided vegetation. They provided the ability to be able to farm and do other things of that nature. We are going to see some similarities in the Kemetic religions that you will see in the Sumerian religions, and they literally could have been one copying the other, but not knowing who copied whom. But there is a consensus of mind share that was around the world. Whether somebody went and took this information to other societies, as some of the stories that talks about how Osiris went out and restarted civilizations all over the world after the Younger Dryas period, as well as Enki and Elnana and other of the Anunnaki going out and restarting civilization, and these stories became their stories, right? You still, and if that's the case, then that could be, but it could just be the simple thing of mind share. I'll give you an idea of mind share in the ether. I had an idea for one of the next aspects of the cigar lounge when I reopened it, of what I wanted to do. I was talking to a gentleman last night. We have not had this conversation before, but he had the exact same idea, almost the exact same idea. So there is something to the aspect that there is a general group mind that we can all pull from. So, so it could possibly be that there are so many similarities, just interchangeable with the names and some of the actions that we can find throughout the world with civilizations that had absolutely zero connection with each other. But because we have so much information from this area, it does take the lion's share of attention. Now, Mesopotamia is really the two oldest civilizations in Mesopotamia that most people focus on would be the civilizations of Sumeria and Akkadian. The Akkad was Akkad. So in looking at those two civilizations, it's the writings and the monuments and the potteries and things that we've been able to unearth concerning them, the Sumerian language is unlike any other language that was around in that time frame and did not really survive. Akkadian being one of the first, when some say the absolute first Semitic language that ever came about, was and is the primary language that we know about now. Because Sumer and Arcadia shared such a great history and lived in the similar areas with one another. And the weird thing about it, the Sumer civilization just decreased and died away. We don't know why. We don't know what happened. We don't know if they got absorbed and who they got absorbed into. We have no ideas of those things. But we saw that the Akkadians became the larger civilization and therefore took prominence. Almost all the deities have a Sumerian name and an Akkadian name, and those names are interchangeable. It depends on which one that we're talking about. Some names are more popular to use than other names. Oftentimes, we find ourselves using the Sumerian name over the Akkadian name, but a lot of these deities are exactly the same way you will find between the Greeks and the Roman deities, whereas you're either Jupiter or Zeus, but we're talking about the exact same deity. It's just a change of name because based on two cultures that were very close to each other and similar to each other. Both of these civilizations, their history that we know about starts around about 5,000-6,000 years ago. Some estimate that they may have started even 8,000 years ago. But these stories, these mythologies of these deities, traveled across millennia, anywhere from 6 to 3,000 years. We have the same stories being told, but these stories did change and they were fluid, and they could change based on who was in charge and how that community and how times and for them modernization occurred. So, and for us, we may look at it and be like, oh, well, this is right and this is wrong. This is right and this is wrong. This is a true and this is a false one. But for those people who lived during that day, in which we always have to keep in our mind that we have to try our best to see it as those people saw it back then. Mythologies were meant to be fluid. They were meant to be able to change. They were meant for them to have that fluidity about them so that it fits into their culture. Unlike how today with our religions, we want to make them so that they are the same. They can never change. There never can be anything different about them. The stories have to be, the old stories have to still be valid for today in the same way that we tell them, instead of recognizing that these stories do change. So in that, what we have is the Sumerians being almost like, I don't know if you guys took Latin in school. If you ever taken Latin in school, Latin considered a dead language because hardly anybody speaks it, but it was like a language of the elites. It was a language that was still being used to write certain things. As we saw in the Roman Empire, but even with the Roman, the first language that was like that was the Greek language, and then it grew into being into the Latin, and the Latin became that language that still people study it today. Some people still use it to a certain extent, but it's still here, but not spoken in general by any nation or country or people group. So Sumerian language became such, whereas even though the Akkadians were writing their Atrahasis, their Enuma Elish, it was written in Sumerian, although it was written by the Akkadians. So that just gives you an idea of how these people were functioning during that time frame. I'll make sure I don't miss too much. That's why Christians and Muslims deny our ancestors. True. Win the war, on point. Yeah, who wins the war? Exactly, on point. At least always got my back. Appreciate you. Grand Rising Donald. All these civilizations who intervene to make things right. God or nature. God is in man, and so is the devil, Satan. And we're going to talk about that as well. This is weird. This little gnat kind of likes this cigar because he sure is flying up by it. All right. So as we look at some of this information, this is weird. I hope that I won't continuously get distracted by this gnat. Most people, when they start looking at the Sumerian and Akkadian gods, the place that most people will start is with Anu. That's where most people start. They start with Anu. But one of the things that we have to realize that Anu is more of the perfected version of God. The people of Sumeria and Arcadia understood that these deities came into a perfected state through Anu, but that there was a time before Anu, that Anu had parentage, and that parentage is connected to Anu and began that beginning of a more perfected father of the gods situation. And we've seen this in other ancient civilizations, whether we're looking at the Greeks and how you go from chaos into the Titans and then into the Greek gods, or if we're looking at the Kemetic and we go from the Ogdoad to the Ogdoad being broken down into 8 forces or energies, and then the perfection came from the cosmic egg of Ra, and then Ra proliferates all the other forces of nature through him and creates Shu and Jeb and these other deities. So the Sumerians were no different in that format, although in and around the same time as the Kemetic. We're not sure which one was first and which one was second, but both seem to have a similar understanding, a similar thought process on this beginning. So when we think about this type of situation, that perfection, that first primordial ooze, watery type deity was a being called Namu. Namu was like the great mother before Mother Goddess that was already in existence, was already there. She gave birth to all the great gods, kind of like how Zeus was given birth from the Titans, I believe, or the Titan chaos. And so out of that chaos comes these deities, comes these gods. The same thing in this Sumerian situation, which is something that we can see similar written in Genesis, when in the beginning everything was chaotic, and then God breathed over the waters and then said, "Let there be light." So there was some substance, some watery substance that was present in the Abrahamic religions, in the same way that the Sumerians talked about a watery substance that had consciousness called Namu, and she was this mother goddess that then birthed out all the other gods. But before she birthed out all these other gods, she first created different gods. And of course, because we're looking at this over thousands of years of time, these stories change here and there, and we're going to get to some of those change. One of those, to give you an example of that, Namu produces Apsu and Tiamat. The Apsu and Tiamat are the fresh waters and the salt waters that were joined together. And then by separating those, the fresh waters and the salt waters, you get life. You start to have creation. And they looked at the universe, and my flat earthers are going to love this part. They looked at the universe as a sphere. And in that sphere, you have the waters above and the waters below. Now, that salt water, Apsu being the waters below, Tiamat being the waters above, and then through the middle was a plain, right? And in the middle of that plain stood the earth. Now, they did think the earth was a globe, right? And stood the earth as the center of the universe. And we know for eons, man believed the earth was the center of the universe. And then at the edges of the universe, of that plane, and the edges of the universe stood two mountains. And these two mountains held up the waters above. So they were like the foundations. And we see that the Bible talks about how the foundations of the universe, the foundations of the earth. So now this idea of two mountains holding up the foundations of the universe was a similar story to something that they had already been talking about. Let me see what. They're about to blast me with memes. I wasn't likely, but it's fine. So you have them holding up the firmament of the universe. Now, from that creation, there are multiple other deities that are created. And let me make sure I get some of these names right. Where you have Lamu and Lahamu, Anzu, and these were not perfect beings. They even created different demons, whether it was Bashmu or Lashmu, or I'm looking at the ones that I can pronounce pretty decently. Ugalu, Ugalu, sorry. So you had these different demons that it also produced. Now that perfection didn't come until Lamu and Lahamu produced two children. Those two children was Anshar and Kinshar. Anshar and Kinshar then produce who becomes the father of all the gods, which is Anu. Anu becomes that perfection of the gods. So in the same way that the Ogdode has different four aspects within the Ogdode, and each Ogdode, in each portion of that is a male and a female version, and all those get together, create the cosmic egg, and then birth out the perfection of Ra. This is a Kemetic story, but it comes into play in the same way that these other deities function, but not functioning at perfection until you get Anu, and Anu becomes this father of the god. Now, of course, Anu is recognized by the name that we call Anunnaki. Anu is the sky, and Ki is his primary wife in most stories, and Kib is earth. So the sky and the earth comes together to create all the other deities. And some of the most popular, most well-known of those deities is your Enlil, Enki, Ninurta, Ninharsag, Dumuzi. All these other deities are created, they're born, and they are born through sex because they anthropomorphize these beings to make them more similar to humans. Now, some of those things change in the stories depending upon who won the war, as was said earlier, and what kingdoms grew. So as Babylon became a greater city, and with their patron deity originally being Enlil, but then changing over to Marduk, the story changed to Tiamat was irritated and did not like and wanted to destroy all the gods produced from Anu, because people were worshiping those deities and not worshiping Tiamat anymore. And Tiamat was considered chaos as well by this time frame. She had changed from the fresh waters to be meaning chaos. Marduk, since during the Babylonian Empire rule, slices open Tiamat, and when he slices Tiamat, kills Tiamat, he takes Tiamat and fashions a portion of Tiamat into the earth, and then the other portion of it is, some scholars say it is the asteroid belt. Others just say the rest of the universe, that it created the sky, the heavens. So Tiamat is sliced to create the land, the earth, and the heavens, to create that separation as well. So that's because the Babylonians were now in control and now in charge. So their version of the story gets told. And this was a common thing because these deities were patron deities of different cities. And being a patron deity of these different cities, their notoriety grew based on the growth of that civilization, of that city state. So whereas you had Enki, he grew because Eridu was considered one of the first and greatest cities, and Eridu, patron deity, was Enki, or called Ea, in relation to the Akkadians, but we mostly use Enki. He was the lord of the earth. He was the god of wisdom, of magic, fresh water. So he presided over that city. Whereas then you have Enlil, who was the high god, lord of the air for the city of Nippur. And during the Sumerians' reign, Nippur was a larger city, a grand city. And each one of these deities, based on their city and the growth and the power of their city, their notoriety was spread out amongst these people. Now, all of this became a greater influence on the Mesopotamian area because of Sargon of Akkad. Sargon of Akkad is theorized as the first emperor, the first one to create an empire for the Akkadian society. And because he did that and his power spread so far and wide, these deities became the primary deities throughout this area. And throughout the Mesopotamian area, and with their trading with other civilizations, it's possible that these ideas bled over into these other civilizations, and they begin to tell their own versions of this story. Who's that? Coach Ren, is it possible that mankind will rise above the limits that the Anunnaki placed on humanity and even possibly overthrow them? I want to answer that, Lola, but there's a part of this that I want to talk about before I get there. So if you can be patient for just a little bit, I'm going to get to that part. This is not scripted at all, so I kind of know how I want to go through this, but we're going to just see how it goes. Because I was running late, I didn't take the time to write my bullet points in the order that I wanted to do them. So I'm just going based on how it flows. So with these deities growing based on the different civilizations, we get the worship of these deities. And many of the stories that we can find follow this pathway of understanding who these deities were. And they acted like humans. They had jealousies, they had anger, they did all these things because, as the story is told, when Anu first began to birth out the Anunnaki, he actually created two types of gods. He created the Anunnaki, which were your sky gods, your bigger gods, and Grand Rising Oki. And then he also created the Agigi. Now, different scholars agree and disagree on which gods were higher, the Anunnaki or the Agigi. Most of the time, the Agigi are gods that are just below the Anunnaki gods. In other translations, it seems like the Agigi are higher than the Anunnaki. But for the most part, it seems that the Anunnaki were higher than the Agigi, mainly with Anu being the one who created the Agigi. Now, the Agigi were ones who worked for the Anunnaki in most of the stories. And that sounds a lot like how you have in the Abrahamic religions, you have God, Yahweh, and then you have your different angels who are of Yahweh, right? Or in this case, Yahweh also becomes Enlil or El. So, and the other gods will be, the angels will be considered the Elohim, all the different sub-gods. But they work for them. Like how Michael is the archangel, the warrior. Gabriel is the messenger of this Canaanite god Yahweh. So there, when Christians or anybody in the Abrahamic claim that they are monotheistic, right off the bat, they're really not. because they have two tiers of gods. They have the primary god, who seems to embody both masculine and feminine, but they primarily make him masculine. But he has all these other deities that he also created in the same way that Anu created the Igigi. I got it. I got the net. Right? And we see that when humans were created, they worship the angels in similar fashion when you read, especially when you read the Old Testament. Every time an angelic being comes down, they get on their knees, they bow down, they put their head down, they call them Lord. It's lowercase Lord, as if they're identifying you're not God, you're not the top level gods, you're a lower level God, but you are to be given reverence. And what is worship other than giving reverence? The angelic beings, their feet are washed, they're fed. They are in the Lot story. They are. He offers his virgin daughters, to the men of the city of Sodom instead of them taking on angelic flesh. But they are given this higher standard, right? You've been them kiss ass, yeah. Appreciate that, Norman. But they give the angelic beings this higher status than man, and they give reverence to the angelic beings in the same way that Anu is the top god, but reverence is given to other gods. So this is still that is the core of polytheism. And no matter what religion it is, you have that similar trope, whether it's Zoroastrianism, the worship of the Aten, the Christianity. There's still reverence given to the angels. There's reverence given to a demigod of Jesus, and so on and so forth, until they try to make Jesus one with God, with the created God. So there's always this intermittent level of deities in the same way that the Sumerians had it, the Akkadians had it, the Greeks have it. Pretty much every religion, the Ifa, they have it. In Hindu, it's Brahma, and then there's all the sub-deities that represents natural aspects of Brahma, and have powers and weapons and things of that nature. So you still had all that. Wait a minute. Wasn't El wasn't El the father of both Enlil and Enki? No, El is Enlil. El becomes Enlil. When you get into the Abrahamic religion, Enlil becomes El. Anu is kind of blended into Enlil and blended into the El. So really you can say El is a combination of Enlil and Anu, the father and the son, because Enlil is the legitimate son of Anu through his wife, who is also his sister. In some of the teachings, because Anu and Ki are brother and sister, right? So Enlil is the legitimate ruler in the Sumerian pantheon, because he comes from the bloodline of both the mother and the father, whereas Enki is coming from a different bloodline and was created through Anu and his dealings with the original source, which is Namu in the Sumerians. But in the Akkadians, Enlil is, I don't know, I can't read it well, but Ishmasad, which was a consort, a concubine of Anu, is where he comes from. So he's pretty much a jump off. He's a child of a jump off. Imagine it's like Solomon, he had his 300 wives and 700 concubines. Enki comes from him being with one of the concubines instead of being from one of the wives. Whereas in Enlil, he actually comes from the legitimate wife, the queen, which is Ki. And you get the Anunnaki, earth, sky and earth. So we have those similar kinds of teachings. Now, for those people, they believe that the gods dwelled among them similar to how, as we've been going through what's wrong with the Bible, we look at Leviticus, and we've been going through Leviticus, going through Exodus. A tent of meetings was created, and in that tent of meetings, that's where Yahweh is supposed to live. That's where El is supposed to dwell with the people. And they move this around, and wherever they move this tent of meetings, they reset it up. This is where he presents himself. This is where the priesthood would give worship and give sacrifice to him. The Sumerians, Akkadian, the Mesopotamian people had the same mindset. They built these large ziggurats and holy places in the middle of the cities where people can come and worship, and they believe that their deities dwelled there. Now they had statues and believe that these deities imbued themselves into the statues. One of the separations the Abrahamics tried to create was to get rid of those statues. So they would give food, and they would sacrifice animals, burn those animals. They would pour out libations, because in their teachings they had to feed the gods, and they have to feed the gods several times a day. And as we're going through Leviticus and Exodus, we see that same practice became part of the Abrahamic religions, where they had to feed the deities, because for them, this idea of the deities dwelling inside them wasn't something that they did. They believed the deities dwelled outside of them, but with them, and that their job, and they would receive greatness if they protected these deities. They took care of these deities. So the deities moved around the cities, and they would literally take the statuettes, and different cities, states, gods like Inanna could come and visit Marduk, right? The god, and a lot of these deities were based on natural occurrences. A gentleman sent me a little thing they asked me to talk about, and so you had the god Sin, Sin, just like how they say sin, right? The god Sin became a very popular god because he was in Ur, the city of Ur. Who else came from the city of Ur? Abraham, right? Abraham came from the city of Ur. The god Sin was the moon god. That god Sin birthed out a son. That son is named Utu to the Akkadians, but Shemesh to the Sumerians, and he is the god of the sun. He's the sun god, right? So the moon created the sun according to their stories, but because they were from the city of Ur, and Ur was a major city, it grew in those deities grew in popularity, right? And now Sin is also called Sin is the Akkadian name. Sorry, Nana is the Sumerian name, and they get together, and the Sumerian name is Utu, the Akkadian name is Shemesh, and this is the and he becomes the god of Sepur, whereas Sin is the god of Ur, and that grows in his status, and he is the sun god. And he also winds up marrying Ereshkigal, which is his stepsister, Utu, and they manifest Ilnana or Ishtar. So there's a lot of incest going on here. So we understand that we see all that incest happening in the Bible as well, right? That's how, a lot of these deities and a lot of these so-called righteous people kept their bloodline, because it was a part of how their deities created their bloodlines. Because if you think about what I just said, Sin, right, got with Negal, created Utu or Shemesh. They also had a child named Ereshkigal, so they were full sisters. Sorry, Ereshkigal and Utu get together and create Ishtar or Ilnana. Right now, they also have other husband-wives connections, depending upon the variations of the story, and birth out other deities as well. We have 6 people gods, pretty much. Is this why Lucifer? What's about the story of Lucifer and God disagreeing, and Lucifer refused to bend his knee to Adam and Eve, was deemed disobedient? I'm gonna get there because that is a story about. It's not really about Lucifer. Well, it became Lucifer, but originally the story is not Lucifer. Lucifer is the planet Venus. It's an astrological thing. And understand, they created many of these stories based on what they saw in the sky. But I'm talking more about that when we get to their creations of man, which is what we're about to go into right now. So you had a situation that was going on where the Igigi, or the angels, they were working to take care of the gods, but they got tired of taking care of the gods in that way. So they basically went on a strike. They basically said, we're working too hard. We're doing too much. We're in the Sumerian version, they're mining the gold that is needed. And they get tired, they get frustrated. And they say, hey, they started a union, and pretty much, and they decided they're going to rebel. So we get our war in heaven, get our rebellion. Now, this story was later in I think it's in Kabbalic teachings. This story was related to what Norman is saying, where the angels in the Sumerian Akkadian version, they were tired of mining the gold and feeding and taking care of the Anunnaki. But later that gets converted into when man was created, this deity, Anu or Enlil or El, loved man so much and wanted the angels to bow down to man, or the Igigi to bow down to man. And they was like, hell no, we're not doing that. Right. And so that started the war. But in the original story with the Sumerians, Akkadians, it was, they were just working too hard and they weren't enjoying the fruits and benefits of their work. So Enki comes up with this plan. This plan was to create man. And in creating man, with the help of Enlil, it was Enki, Enlil, Anu, Ki, and Harsag, they got together, created man out of clay. And we know most of these stories talks about how God created man out of the earth, whether we're talking about the Abrahamic story, or we're talking about the Kemetic story, we can be talking about the Aztecs and Mayan story, but out of the earth, out of dirt, or out of vegetation, man is created. Some of it gets a little weird. It talks about how man was created in one story that most people don't know about by Enki basically masturbating and spilling his seed on the earth, and that created man or life on earth. If they are not brothers, I'm wondering why the Enlil Enki has some Enlil Enki, some have said that they are brothers at war. No, they are brothers. They're just stepbrothers. They're half brothers, rather, not stepbrothers. They're half brothers. They have the same father, but they have different mothers. Enlil and Enki. So they are brothers. Enki being the oldest, Enlil being the youngest, but Enlil having the birthright, whereas Enki does not have the birthright. You can see a similarity in that story, in the story of Jacob and Esau, right? The older brother didn't get his birthright, even though he was the older brother. He sold it to the younger brother for a bowl of soup. But in this story, it's just that they had different moms, and one mother was the queen and the other mother was a consort. So there's still a similar connection of two brothers and the younger getting the birthright over the older, just a different way that they got that birthright. So in that fashioning of man, when in the creation story, the Enuma Elish, it talks about how when Enki created man, man was created in such a way that man lived a long time, incredibly long time, like tens of thousands of years, right? And them living tens of thousands of years, man began to replicate and produce, which was considered the original sin of man, is the fact that they were able to produce, because originally they were not supposed to be able to produce, right? Grand Rising Jonathan. I'm glad you caught me alive. So man wasn't, but then man was producing and producing at such a rate that literally Enlil, who now is the larger god, the biggest god to the Sumerian people, to the Akkadian people rather at this time frame, he decides that man is too loud and he wants to destroy man. He tries a couple of different various ways, sending wild beasts, other natural disasters, earthquakes, things of the nation. Then he decides he's going to flood man out, right? So mind you, these things are supposedly happening like 100,000, 200,000 years ago when these things were happening. So he decides finally, I'm going to flood man out. This brings us to the Young Dryas period of about 15,000 years ago. Well, 9,000 years ago, actually. About 9,000 years ago, after the Young Dryas period, when a flood supposedly hit the earth because the polar caps melted. Well, after this ice age, all the ice melts. Scientifically, that's the part we do know about. That's what most like that. It was a flooding based on the ending of an ice age and a rapid flooding because of the ice defrosted like in 6 days. So this is where we get this flood story. In their story, and this is where the atrahesis comes in, Enlil wanted to kill everybody. Enki was like, no, he loved the humans, so he made it so that some humans could live. But in that deal, Enki says to Enlil, one of the things that we can do is cut man's lifespan down so that he doesn't replicate himself as quickly and he dies earlier. And this is where in the Sumerian story, disease is introduced, right? So we started seeing disease happening around 9,000 years ago because this is what Enki put into motion. When you see some of the stories of the Mayans, Aztecs, the Ifa in West Africa, they talk about after this flood time frame, this is when the deities either spray something in the air or put something in the water of man, and that causes man to be dumbed down, but also causes man to start experiencing disease and cuts man's life down. Of course, the same thing in the Bible, after the flood, this deity said, I'm going to cut man's life down to 120 years. So we can see the influence of this Mesopotamian story in that flood story. One, that there is a flood. Two, that Atras is given a boat, an unsinkable boat, to be able to survive the flood. And with all the necessary seeds of everything, seeds, not the actual animals, not the actual fauna and flora, but the seeds to be able to restart the earth after this deluge happens. So we have that same story. And then afterwards, man's life is cut short. Now, sin had already entered the world, according to the, what's the story? According to the Bible story, the Abrahamic story. But in this instance, sin doesn't come into the world, disease doesn't come into the world, rather, until after the flood. And that's what cuts man's life down. So will we be able to supersede what the Anunnaki supposedly did in order to cut our lifespans down? I think that we will. As we grow in science, we are learning different ways to expand life. And although one of the situations, the solution is simple in knowledge, but difficult to accomplish right now for us. And I'm going to go a little scientific on this. The reason why your body continues to live and thrive is not just because of your immune system, but because your cells, each one of your cells has telomeres. I talked about this the other day, I think, have telomeres. As your cells replicate themselves, like the liver you have now is not the liver you had 7 years ago. It's a brand new liver. Every cell from your liver 7 years ago is dead. So every cell that creates your liver now is brand new. Every time those cells duplicate themselves, the telomeres shrink. Once the telomeres are all gone, as they shrink, you start to experience aging, and then you die when they can't reproduce themselves anymore, and you have different organ failures. And enough organ failures, you die, right? Was that the thing that the Anunnaki did to man? Because if your telomeres Cancer cells, which everybody is born with dormant cancer cells in them. Cancer cells are the only cells in your body where no matter how many times they replicate, the telomeres never shrink. They stay the same. So telomeres, cancer cells can live forever. Barring any accident that you could have or any other disease that destroys the telomeres in your cells, if our cells can maintain their telomeres, we would live tens of thousands of years, if not longer. And that would break whatever, if these beings did something to our genetic code that shrinks our telomeres, that would break that situation. If this story is true that they did something, then that means that there is something we can do to reverse it, right? So that's, and I think that Lola had asked that question. So we could supersede what they did if they were just spatial beings or pre-Earth civilization beings that were highly intelligent technologically, and then we'd be able to fix that, right? So if they kept our telomeres, like Raquel just said, if they kept the telomeres, then yeah, we should be able to reverse that if that's what they did. Now, if it's just how things are, we still can break it because science is meant to be broken. Rules of science are meant to be investigated and broken down and fixed. Now, so back to the story. But we see that similarity when you read the Atrahasis, which is pretty much a flood story. We also see that trying to supersede what they did in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The primary thing that's going on in the Epic of Gilgamesh is him going out to see if he can live forever, if he can find immortality. But he ultimately fails. Now, one of the reasons that they believe this story was written is because when Marduk becomes in charge, he changed the narrative. Prior to that, the human societies that were in existence, they primarily believed that you lived and you died. When you die, you go and live in an underworld, an afterlife. It didn't matter what if your life was good or bad. There was no judgment in their teachings. You went and lived in another afterlife because they believed that when you die, you had this ghostly form, and that ghostly form goes and lives in this afterlife. It is not until you get to Marduk where it's more emphasized that if you don't participate in worshiping the gods, even more so by giving sacrifice, this is when the sacramental cultures, sacramental cults begin to develop. That if you don't give honor to the gods through sacrifice, if you don't do any of those things, you will cease to exist, which we get Sheol. You will cease to exist, or Sobek will eat your heart and you'll go into oblivion. So oblivion is what we get. Sheol is going into that underworld. But if you listen to the gods and you do what the gods are saying for you to do, if you are giving your sacrifices and things of that nature, obeying the gods and taking care of the gods, then you get to go live in the afterlife with the gods. This is also when Marduk pretty much changes his name and becomes Ra as well. So because I forgot what city in Kemet became a patron city of Marduk, but they changed the name to Ra at that point. This is why there's definitely overlap in all of this. So this at that point we started developing this. The religions all started developing this sense of an afterlife and living with the deities. Oh, Heliopolis. Okay. But this is when they start dealing with these deities, start worshiping these. They also started this process that we still have today, where there were certain things that you can do in your obedience to these deities that if you did them, because we found these poems that they wrote where like you have a father telling his son that if every day you worship the gods and give sacrifice to the gods, pray to the gods, follow your sacramental cult aspects of the gods, then the gods will reward you with a great harvest. They'll reward you with a great wife. They'll reward you with great kids. all these rewards start coming into your life if you do what these gods need for them to be taken care of and be happy. So we had that thing started in the Babylonian society, and it started changing religion so that it became more connected, because prior to that, the way that you commune with the gods was two different ways. And we see this today. Kingships was determined by how a person connected them, how a king was supported by this god. This is why city-state gods were so important, because when the Babylonians came up, before the Babylonians became a great society, Marduk was a unknown, very low-level god, right? But then as the Babylonian Empire is built and Marduk gets personified by that, this king, as he grows, he said, the kings, the Hammurabi and other kings, they go into a mindset where they say, look, the reason why our kingdom, our city-state has grown is because of our worship of Marduk. So Marduk becomes the personified god, and then his story is changed, and he becomes the one who kills Tiamat and creates and fashions the earth and all this sort of thing. So he grows. So through the kingship, that grows the importance of the gods, and that's how the people are connected to the gods. So they have to worship the king or take care of the king, obey the king, and then their god will take care of them. So through that downline. So this is why kings have always been associated with the being over the religion, and as well as being over the state. They even had this ceremony where they would, the top priest, and of course the king had his priest as well. And the king would take that, the priest would bring the king in every year because they had certain appointed dates of holidays to worship these gods. The same way we have those today, and the same way we see them. Every religion has a god being born on December 25th based on the winter solstice. Every one of these cities, they had holidays based on when the spring equinox happened because of the refertility of the land. So whether it was Ishtar or it's Jesus or Dionysus or whomever, this deity brought in spring, right? Most of the time it was a female deity that brought in spring, a mother deity that brings in spring. And so that was always at the spring equinox. So when the Council of Nicaea was determining when Easter is going to happen, it was based on the spring equinox, because the other powerful group beyond the king and the priest was the seers, the astrologists, the ones who will receive prophecies and what's the word I'm looking for? Can't think of the word I'm looking for. But they would receive these different discernments of understanding what the gods were going to was warning them about, or moving them in, or telling them what was going to happen, or how they can change certain things. All right, Raquel, appreciate you. Now make sure you share the video as well. So these seers, which of course later on the Bible gets rid of seers, but then use seers, right? Sorcerers, astrologers, these people should be stoned, but we see this star in the east. So a great birth is about to happen, right? There's always, astrology is good when it's your religion. When as soon as it's somebody else's, then it's witchcraft, is evil. But this idea of looking at the stars, and it could be any person who receives these divinations, that's the word I was looking for, these divinations, those people were your other connection to the gods, right? And the average person could be this. So that development actually started for this area with the Sumerian Akkadian people to look at the stars and try to divine what the gods were thinking, or what they were doing, or what's coming. Because in these religions, these deities were omniscient as well. They knew the future. They knew what was coming, what was going to happen, the decisions that you were going to make, what the weather patterns were going to be, whether you're going to have a good harvest or a bad harvest. They were omniscient, and oftentimes would try to send messages to the people. So when they saw a comet, they would see that as a divine information that's coming from the gods, right? Same thing that we see with other religions that develop, right? that they see. That's how they see them. They see, they see the stars as telling them something about the gods. And here's that person who's connected to it, who's not just, it could be the king, it could be the priest, but it could be this person who has made some good predictions a few times. And now this person is also connected to this deity, has insight on this deity, and then is also protected by this deity. There are multiple poems and quotes about how certain regular people who were very devout to this deity survived being crushed by buildings, or being crushed by the enemy, or not eaten by lions. So we get the stories, we see these similar types of motifs that flow into what the Abrahamic religions wind up teaching as well. Just heard from what I would call hearsay, because I don't, just heard from what I would call hearsay. I don't know if it's true, but complete these smaller strands of our DNA, you get to get rid of the worship dream to increase lifespan and natural health. I have heard something about that, but I have to do more research on the worship gene, as far as that's concerned. But we do get these stories. We got these similar stories are all throughout the biblical text, because it's a continuation of the thought. The only thing that changes it is who comes in charge and what scientific advancements are made. As more and more scientific advancements are made, these stories become less and less, woo-woo mythologies. And then then they would change the narrative to fit something else. Because literally certain gods were created, lesser gods, because a new technology was made. Oh, we make copper. We got to have a god of copper. We made, iron. Well, we took the iron and we got a god of iron. Oh, copper. And we took some, I don't know what makes copper. I think it's like iron and aluminum or something like that. Well, the iron and the aluminum guy got together and they made copper. I'm not sure if that's the actual metallurgical way of making copper, but if that is. You had your two gods of those ores. Those two gods made it and they made copper. And this is a new deity. And because we're in the copper age, this is now the primary deity. I'm not saying that's what they did for that particular instance, but that's how those things work themselves out. Because when you did deal with the Greeks, though, the Greeks would do something like that, most assuredly, where certain earthen material had deities attached to them. Because I don't think I've ever seen something like that with the Sumerians and the Akkadians. Most of their gods were either connected to a city-state and or connected to some force of nature. And oftentimes you might have multiple gods connected to the same aspect of nature, depending upon what city-state you were what city-state you were in. All right. But we do see some differences in these stories. I mean, some similarities between the different groups of these stories. So like Enlil becomes the primary god. He becomes the storm god to the Shashu people and the people of Canaanite, because he was considered the lord of the wind. He was a wind god. And they also attributed that to storms. So since he was a wind god and a storm god, this is why they began to, the Canaanites call him Yahweh, and the Shashu people call him El. They get together with, more than likely, the people of the Aten who worship the sun. Well, they didn't worship the sun. They used the sun as a symbol. And Enlil becomes El, or Yahweh. Well, he becomes El and Yahweh, and those names become interchangeable, and they become the Jehovah. So he is this storm deity, and they begin to worship him because beforehand they was worshiping Enki. But Enki, who was the Lord of the earth by this time frame, he is, giving to the people, but it seems like they're being punished because they're going in and out of captivity of different people, and they believe that Enlil or Yahweh is punishing them. But then he was in the Kemetic though. He's the wind god, so he's comparable to Shu, who separates the waters from the waters, the salt waters, the deep waters of the deep from the waters of the heavens, or it could be the salt water from the fresh water, in the same way that Apsu and Tiamat had to be separated. They just, in their story, they use the wind as separation of the two. But those stories are very similar as you go through them, and the more and more you study these stories, because you guys got to go back and study these stories yourself, and you got to get deeper, because you can find something like this sheet. Let me do you one better. You can find it's easy to find a graph of these different deities. But what's more difficult, what you have to do then is go and search them out. I mean, you have to then go and start researching each individual deity. Yeah, let me put that on there. So you guys can see one of the things that I use and look at. Excuse me. I don't know how big that is on your screen. Can y'all read that? Let me see. Maybe that's bigger. That's about as big as I can make it. But when you look at these genealogies, it lets you, you can start to break down who these deities are. So when you're reading the Atrahasis or the Enuma Elish, you'll be able to go back and forth. When you're realizing that Abraham comes from the city of Ur, and the primary god from the city of Ur was Enlil, then that gives you a deeper understanding of why he talks the way he talks, why El becomes the primary god in their story when they're rewriting it in this Bible, with the understanding that the Bible was this thing, the Old Testament stories, at the earliest writings of them were in around the 6th century BCE, which would be like your 500s BCE, maybe even your 5th century, which is your 400s. Even when they talk about, oh, we found the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they match up. Dead Sea Scrolls are dating back to around the 1st and 2nd century BCE. So it's not like they're older. They're just, for a few hundred years, you have similar stories still being told. And even those stories are different. Those stories are still different. People say that and that's a whole nother video, a whole nother conversation, that I would go and do more research on so I can point out the specifics. But there are some very valid differences in those stories concerning that. So, but utilizing a graph like this, it can give you a better understanding of who these people are. Because even when we look at, what was the name that I was looking for? When you study, I think it's Ansar. If you go back and you start studying Ansar, he's the sky god of the northern pole, celestial northern pole. When you look at how they depict Ansar and understand that he was a deity in the area of Syria, and you'll start to see how, with him being in Syria, his worship gets transformed into what's my man name? Into the Zoroastrian religion of Azur and worship of Azur Monster. And with Anshar, he is a deity that comes before Anu. He's Anu's father. So for them, it's like, well, we're going to go to the father of that deity that these other guys, the Sumerians and the Akkadians, were saying is the primary god. We're going to go to that one. And this group, they go out and they leave out of Syria, and they go and they establish themselves in modern day Iran. And that's where your Zoroastrians come from. And then they claim that they're only worshiping one deity. but in truth, they're worshiping the father of Anu, and they're not worshiping, and so they're just taking that one particular god and making that their primary god. Um, and then from Asura Mazda, they create the devil version of him, and his name is Agramenia. So even in there, and then they have demons, and they have other angelic beings that they pay homage to, that they give respect to. So they're still worshiping multiple deities, no matter how you slice it. In Islam, they still have, even though the jinn can be controlled by people, the jinn are not necessarily all good and all bad, but they can be controlled by people. The jinn are still these sub deities in between, Allah and God. I mean, Allah and man. And they still have the angels. They still have their Gabriels and their Michaels. The name is slightly different, but they still have, well, some of them are very different, but they still have these different names. And even like the Hindu, the people of this day, they may have had their primary patron god, right? They had their primary patron god, but in your household, you may have a different aspect of a god that you deified. So if you were in the city of, if you was in the city of Ur, although Enlil is the primary deity of the city of Ur, you may say that, well, our family is focused on Sin, the moon god, or we're going to focus on, Shamesh, the sun god, or we are hunters, so we're going to focus on Ninurta because she is the god of hunt. I mean, he is the god of hunting, and he's a warrior god. So depending upon your work and your class of people, you may switch up your primary god in your house. It might be Ninurta, but the primary god of the whole city is still Enlil because he's over the city of Ur. Now, as the Abrahamic religion comes into play, and with Abraham knowing this group, the wife of Enlil, you had two wives of Enlil. Well, you had one wife of Enlil that would have came out of the city of Ur, but they pretty much create two. One, you got Ninlil, who is the lady of the air. She's the goddess of Nippur. She is the goddess of the south wind, and she could also possibly be the Lulutu. From the Lulutu, you get Lilith. So in order to take Ninlil, you make her into Lilith, and I'm sorry I said Enlil's wife, but you make her Adam's first wife. And the Lulutu becomes Lilith. Enlil also had his other wife, right? And that other wife is Asherah. The other wife is Asherah. And Asherah initially is his wife, but then that story gets changed, and even worse, at least Ninlil becomes, still a being, a corporal being. Asherah, she becomes a stick. They just turn her into a stick. That's all she becomes, is a damn stick, which is kind of messed up that she becomes a stick. But she could have originally been, because Asherah was originally a goddess of farmers and of the land. So whereas Asherah was the goddess of the land and was Enlil's second wife, then she becomes a stick. And I can kind of, in some instances, she does become a tree, which they did do that with Ninlil, made her into the Lulutu tree. But then they push her all the way down to being Adam's wife. But then they turn Asherah, who's a farmer, into a stick. And then that way they separated themselves because they were like, okay, we got to get away from all these different deities having wives and birthing children. And we just want to have our deity just have no wife, that is all encompassing and created everything on his own. So as we can see, many of these, when you really dig into these stories, you can, these mythologies, and if you look at it from the standpoint of how they view mythology, that they're flowing, that they change, that they evolve, and there's nothing wrong with them evolving. You can see how it was no problem for the original writers of those Abrahamic texts to take from those stories and move the mythology into what they created, and that becomes your Torah, your Pentateuch, your Old Testament, and then. But then as we move into the Roman society and they're getting away from myths, over 1,000-year period under Roman control, Christianity moves even further away from the mythologies and make it into more something that's concrete, where they don't want it to be movable. They want to keep it as an immovable object and in literature, so that people will stay right there in their beliefs, instead of them being able to change that story later on. But even at that, even though that was attempted, we still can see today how those stories are still have been changed and still are changing as we find out more and more information about what people believed actually back then, what people's thought processes are, because many things that were taken literally about Jesus are now looked upon as more esoteric. Like people will say, oh, I have the Christ mind, right? Instead of just believing in Christ. You know, they would say, oh, I got Christ's mind. Jesus represents your pineal gland, or Jesus represents your left and right brain coming into unity, and you being able to raise your kundalini so that you can have a higher consciousness. So those things have been changed. Even in Buddhism, they've added the Christ mind as like 3 levels below the Buddha head. So like when you get to your 8th and 9th, I see the 8th chakra or your 9th chakra, then you obtain the Christ mind. Is a new teaching in Buddhism over the last like 20 years. And then about your 12th chakra, 12th, 13th chakra is your Buddha head. So we're still doing the same thing of taking these mythologies and making them fit into a more of a modern day culture of how we think about religion in itself. When at the end of the day, it could all be bullshit. It could be some previous intelligent civilization that was living on Earth, some aliens, some interdimensional beings that created man, because scientifically we know that our current version of man, current version, right? Homo erectus or Homo sapien, whichever one you want to call it, 117,000 years is the oldest fossil of Homo erectus that we have. 117,000 years ago. You ain't got shit before then. Everything else before then is some other type of human species. 117,000 years ago. That's our closest ancestor to who we are today. So, Coach, the human brain, the Garden of Eden, the human brain, the Garden of Eden. I like that. At the end of the day, it can be bullshit. It can be. It can. Here's the thing about it. It could be whatever you decide that you want it to be. That's the thing about it. Is that whatever you decide the universe is your freaking universe. Whatever you decide happens when you leave here is what you decide. No one can go against it. No one, you can't prove it. What did I think Debbie said something earlier? Can you prove the spaghetti monster on Saturn? Can you disprove it? You can't do either one. Only thing you can do is believe it. Now we can gather as much scientific evidence as we possibly can to kind of get a good estimate, a hypothesis on what is and what is not. For me, I'm going to say it specifically that way. For me, the best hypothesis that I have is that all these stories are based on a pre-Diluvian civilization that existed, that took whatever our ancestor was before Homo sapien, Homo erectus, messed around with his gene code to make it into workers, because that's the similar story. The Anunnaki had the Agigis as workers. The Agigis got tired of it, and so they made man. Do we follow the same path? Yes. Each civilization has looked at other groups and made them into their workers, slaves. And we follow that same mindset. Are we going to one day, what's the movie Planet of the Apes? If you look at the original version of the Planet of the Apes, the original apes were developed to be workers for man. So, and they did it just like the Anunnaki. They took apes, chimps, and they changed their genome so that they were higher developed and they were the assistants of people. You gotta go look at the old original version. Don't look at the new shit, the old version. And then those apes rebelled and took over. And then the new versions, they spread, a disease was spread, avian flu or whatever it was called. But the original version is more like the Anunnaki story, right? So do we do that? But we follow that same pathway. We create stories of that same pathway. Or do you gotta go back to work? Hey, appreciate you, man. Appreciate you being here. Make sure you share the video, share the videos. But we have that same type of story, but what do we do that's different? Do we rebel like the Agigi and say we ain't doing this shit no more? And the Agigis were now being treated as the gods that they wanted to be. In some of the stories, when Marduk marries a human, the Agigi say, oh shit, if Marduk can marry a human, then we're gonna marry some humans. And they swoop down to Marduk's wedding. They take up 200 women. They start having children with these women. They birth out the what's the tall people? The Nephilim. They birth out the Nephilim, and the Nephilim initially are good. And they're like helpful, and then but they become all consuming and start looking down on the humans, start eating on the humans, and then that's why the flood. That's one of the reasons why the flood happens. Is to get rid of those kids, those kids, because they was also teaching their wives that how to do their Anunnaki technology. Similar with the Titans. The Titans, I think the way that story goes, if I'm correct, is Zeus and his group, they go and kill the Titans. They rebelled against the Titans and killed them and took over, or killed most of them and took over, reigning over the universe and reigning over the earth. So the children overtaking the parents is also a common theme that could be our process. And if that's what you want to go with, sure, go with that one. One of the ways to do that is to figure out how to make them damn telomeres, not be capped, so that we can we can live longer. One of the themes that they have in the Star Trek shows is that they've extended life so long enough that the pursuits of man become greater, that we start to have greater philosophical and intellectual pursuits. If you was born and you knew that your body, that you were going to live 10,000 years, many of the hurry up, rush things that we've done in life, you wouldn't do. Hell, I'm 50. I'd still be in elementary school. Kind of, when you look at it, would I still truly be in elementary school? Probably not. But I would still be in that position where it's like, I don't have to rush and have children. I don't have to rush and build careers of things that I don't want to do, so that I can hurry up and get to a point in my life where I can just relax and then enjoy and study life. Life becomes longer where I can just study life and study growth, and because I got 10,000 years to do so. I got 100,000 years to do so. So there's no rush in life because you got time, But with the small time that we have, we rush through life. We're panicky. We stress out because we're trying to squeeze out as much juice from life as we possibly can because we're rushed. But if we weren't rushed, no, then we would take our time. We'd be like, forget them guys, which was something else that was happening quite often in these Akkadian Sumerian stories, is that the humans, when they were living these long lifespans, were rebelling against the gods quite often. They would rebel. And that rebellious nature, because they had a long life, they had this rebellious nature. But also because the gods, these Anunnaki gods and the Gigis were assholes too. You can't have the Gigi devouring men and eating people and all that sort of thing and think that we just gonna put up with that bullshit. But we were discovering their technologies as well, which is why in that biblical story, we have to hide the tree of life from man. We got to kick him out the garden because now man knows the difference between good and evil. So we got to keep the tree of life away from man. Otherwise, he would live forever. Remember that from the Bible? Say man would live forever. So we got to, now that he knows good and evil. But in the Akkadian story, Sumerian story, it wasn't that man learned the difference between good and evil. It's that Enki taught man how to make tools. The Nephilim the Igigi was teaching their wives and teaching their Nephilim children, and those Nephilim children was teaching man how to make tools. So because of that, man had to be limited. Man could not live forever because then otherwise man wouldn't worship God, or he wouldn't worship these gods. You have that same thing with Prometheus. They say Prometheus brought man fire, so Prometheus had to be punished, just like the serpent or Enki had to be punished for giving man knowledge of tool making. And so he had to be punished. But in that punishment, man was also punished as well and had to be kept away from being able to interact and intervene with the gods at the same time. Coach, I just came into 666 Ether being Caucasian Europeans who both with, I don't know what you said, both with the state, hair, fur, Ether being as Africans. It's said Africans have connection to the universe and all that. Can you share your thoughts on that? I do consider myself a very enlightened person. And the moment that I see where we create these separations between, African people are more connected to the universe, connected to the gods or whatever, than Europeans, I just see that as a basis of Europeans have done so much damage to people of color throughout our recent histories that we want to make ourselves more connected to the universe and to goodness than they are. But if you look at history as we know it in its full birth, African people have done some fucked up stuff just as much as Caucasians have. We'll talk about how Leopold killed, he gave orders for the Congo and it killed 10 million people, right? We'll talk about that. What we won't talk about is how Shaka Zulu, in order to create the Zulu nation, killed 2 million people. Now, there's a big difference between 2 million and 10 million. But you still have a tyrannical person here in the formation of an empire, killed 2 million people. You still have your Idi Amins. You still have all these people throughout history who've done these things. You still have your Aztecs who had no European contact, but they estimate that they killed over 30 million people just in sacrificing over like a long period of time. So that separating who's connected, who has more morality based on race, is really something that we do because we're basing it on history and who's in charge right now. Because if the roles were reversed, and when the roles were reversed, it would have been said the other way. It would definitely been said. I would imagine that when the Moors, now we romanticize the Moors. Oh, they went into Europe, they taught them how to bathe, they gave them universities, they did all this stuff. But we forget they went in there and they conquered the shit out of these people. and they held those people down as well. They treated them substandard, subclass. So during that 700-year period, it's not like they was in there like, oh, you poor little barbarians, let's take care of you. No, they subjugated those people. The same way, when we look at the different warring states in China and these different groups, whoever had the most power subjugated the other people. And those people always thought that they were more connected to the universe after they lived in subjugation for a while. No. Piety is only there because you're being oppressed. You take away the oppression and you become the oppressor. Well, hell, everybody actually thinks they have piety. But the other group doesn't think you are pious. So I think that's a bunch of bullshit to make people feel better about their current situations and the situation of their more recent histories. Anybody can be connected to the universe if they choose. It's a choice. Anybody can have a higher moral standard if they choose. It's a choice. So, Coach Rains, are you saying that the so-called Anunnaki manipulated or genetically modified the original humans that were placed on Earth, which reduced man's lifespan to around 120 years? The evidence based on the fact that multiple cultures talks about these groups of people who was coming in and restarting civilization around 9 to 8,000 years ago. No problem. Around 9 to 8,000 years ago. If it was just one group who was saying that, and other groups who were connected to that group saying that, I was like, okay, that's just some stuff that they saying. But since when you study Ifa, it talks about how, I think in Ifa they poured something in the water, and man's lifespan was reduced, and his connection to his consciousness was reduced. And then in the Incas and Aztecs, they talked about the guy spraying something in the air that reduced man's lifespan and reduces consciousness. The Hopi Indians have a similar story. The Aboriginals in Australia have a similar story. Because you have these people who are not connected with a similar story of some sky people or Anunnakis or whomever reducing man's lifespan, it gives a little bit of credence to that could be a possibility if it is accepted that prior to 15,000 years ago, man was living longer periods of time because of, our genome was different. So right now, I lean more towards that than just some deity after a flood said, hey, yeah, we're going to live in man's time frame. Because scientifically, it makes more sense that there was some action that was taken, some chemical that was introduced that changed the situation, instead of just some deity just poofing shit. So Brett said, glad I answered. Appreciate your, glad you appreciate that. What do you think of my answer though, Brett? I'm curious. Honestly, it's good to have people like you. God wouldn't be God if he, where are my damn glasses? God wouldn't be God if we didn't have people like you. Human knowledge is futile, my friend. It's funny how after all your criticism, God still loves you. Yeah. It is always interesting to me that if you say that proof of your deity is the fact that somebody criticizes your deity, then proof of Allah is the fact that Christians would criticize Islam. Proof of Brahma is that Christians would criticize Brahma. Proof of the Anunnaki is that Christians would criticize the Anunnaki. So if criticism of a deity is proof of the deity, then that would mean all deities exist, because there is always a group that criticizes it from the outside, as well as a group that's going to criticize it that used to be on the inside. You will find that in every religion. So that's a straw man argument because it doesn't, you only will validate it based on your belief in your deity, but not look at the wider margin of, if you apply the same thing to every other religion, Elijah, it would validate those religions as well. But then you would say, well, mine is correct and theirs not. But you're validating every other religion by that stance. So I would come up with something different if I wanted to argue that point, because that's not a good argument right there. And to say that man's knowledge is futile, your entire book is based on man writing this book. Evidently, factually, let me not say evidently, factually, based on the culture to which they lived in during that time frame. You can literally see them writing about their own culture of that day. Everything is descriptive of how they lived and how they thought rules were. The subjugation of women, the prophecies of how the world is going to end, and all these different, all based on their perspective. So your book is man's knowledge as well, which it is showing itself to be futile, because look at our morality today compared to the morality of those people back then. Look at how we live our life. Look at what we know about science, compared to, in that instance. The deity of the Bible is scientifically inept. Scientifically inept. Just in the idea that on the fourth day he created the sun and the moon, but the earth was still watered by a mist. Scientifically, we know that with a moon in orbit and a sun, that the process of evaporation and tide movement will occur, has occurred, does occur, and that produces rain. So from the beginning of the fourth day, even if you say that those days are 1,000 years, and you go at 1 Peter when it says that, there's absolutely no way that for 1,000 years, well, no, if that was the fourth day, you got the fifth day, the sixth day, and the seventh day. That's 3,000 years. There's absolutely no way with 3,000 years of the moon and the sun and the earth having its placement that there would be no rain. And then you still got to wait until you get to Noah before you actually have rain, which is another possible 1,000 years. So you're talking about 4,000 years. Because I think if you do the math, Adam may still be alive when the flood happens. So you got possibly 4,000 years. And you telling me there's no rain, but there's the sun, the moon, there's tides, there's the ebb and flow of tides and evaporation, and there will be clouds and the movement of the wind and currents. So you will have currents, and so the wind would move things. No, bro. Your God doesn't know science, because you're dependent on the futile knowledge of man who was writing it at a time frame where they didn't understand how those things were interconnected. So you might want to try a different argument, because that one doesn't float. That only floats with people who already accept and believe what you believe. Where there are, hey, Grand Rising Space Pepiga, got a Twitch person. Where are the examples of deities sacrificing themselves for the sake of people among the Mesopotamian, Egyptian, or other pantheons? Why do you have to have that? That's another failed argument. The idea that a deity having to sacrifice itself for its people is actually a bad argument to make. Let me give you a couple. Now, did they sacrifice an Anunnaki in order to create man? According to the Anunnaki story, an Anunnaki was sacrificed in order for man to exist, because they required the blood of an Anunnaki. I think it was either Dumuzi. I think it's Dumuzi who was sacrificed in order for man to have his creation. So there's one. So without the sacrifice of an Anunnaki, you don't get man at all. Now, this is a popular argument that I heard from a Muslim, though. Your God, the Christian God, had to sacrifice himself or his son, which is still supposed to be himself, in order to forgive man for the sin that your God originally created and sacrificed, and that sacrifice had been done so that they can be forgiven to come back to the primary God that primary God that wants to kill them for disobeying the sins that he created, when Allah, without sacrificing his son or sacrificing any other man, just forgives. So how much sense does that make? Would you rather have a God that just forgives without sacrificing his son or sacrificing anybody or persons, or a God that requires death in order to save you from himself? If I had to choose between those two deities based on just that alone, I would choose Allah over Yahweh, over the Christian God, because Allah just forgives, where this deity has to have blood sacrifices to forgive. Which one sounds better? You even have a story in your Bible that shows more of the mindset of Allah. The prodigal son, he goes out, he disobeys his father. He says, you ain't supposed to get your inheritance until a certain time. No, I want my inheritance now. He goes out, right? Lives up the life, does all the sinful things, comes back. Your God would have punished the son or sacrificed some animals, to which he did sacrifice an animal. Now I think about it, I think they sacrificed an animal. Yeah, he still had to sacrifice an animal. But at least that father, when the son came back and said, hey, look, I'm just let me work for you. Don't even want his place with his father. Just let me come back home. Your God, at least that father said, no, put on princely robes on that son. You still my son. Yeah, he did a blood sacrifice, but you still my son. But his intent from the very moment he saw his son was, you're still my son. Yeah, I'm not, you ain't gonna be below. At least that's part of an Allah mindset, that I'm just gonna bring you in because you my son. Now he did do a sacrifice though, I forgot about that, which is your God version. But I'd rather just be forgiven, you know? Me and my son had a falling out a couple of years ago, right? At the end of the falling out, when everything was squared away, I just forgave my son, right? And I did go a little rambunctious, and he just forgave me. There was no sacrifice needed to be done, no work that needed to be, nothing extra. Just the love of a father to his son. There was forgiveness just in understanding. I choose that. So, yeah. Every time y'all try to bring up, where does somebody sacrifice? No, and then it's not even a sacrifice. If you know that you're going to get up in 3 days and then go to heaven, that's not a sacrifice. Come to me, and I did this as a video on YouTube and Facebook, Space Pepe Guy, where I talked about the fact that if a sacrifice would be, if my son committed a crime, he murdered somebody, but I go to jail for his crime. And every time he commits another crime, my time gets extended. And I'm never getting out of jail. And I got to suffer in jail for my son. That's a sacrifice. A sacrifice is not, hey, your son murdered somebody. You're going to go to jail. But in 3 years, you're going to get out. And when you get out, you get $100 million. And you can live life great. That's not a sacrifice. It's not. You know, yeah, I gave up a little bit of time, but that's not a sacrifice, because I know what I'm getting at the end. I know it's not real when there's no constant punishment to it. That's a real sacrifice. That's real love. You know, now I ain't gonna do that for my son. You murder somebody, you gonna take that shit. But yeah, you don't. That's not a valid argument. It's not a really good argument at all. I wouldn't use that argument ever. LaQuinn, what's up, sir? Well, I have yet to see. Where's my glasses? I have yet to see or hear of anything speaking against this God in the manner of honesty being proven wrong. towards and against this God. Characters you believe in. I have the stories in the religious book called the Bible. So I'm going to need proof that people like Coach are proven wrong on this instead of the hearsay and the bold claims you're making as Christians continue. You know, they only thing they can say is what the Bible says, and the Bible says. Yeah. Yeah. The belief does not prove a God. Because, me and Debbie, we believe in the spaghetti monster on Saturn. Prove us wrong. Prove the spaghetti monster on Saturn don't exist. You can't prove it. You cannot prove it at all. You can't prove it exists, and yet you can't prove it doesn't exist. But it's belief. To argue belief is futile. You can't really argue belief because that's just something that a person believes. It's kind of like when a parent has a child and that child is just out here robbing and murdering and pillaging and all these other kind of things, but you got that crazy ass parent who believes that my son is a good son. He's a good boy. No. Matter of fact, I told you guys to watch that movie, The Last Days of Ptolemy Gray. I advise y'all to watch that movie, The Last Days of Ptolemy Gray. There's an aspect in that, it's a series, not a movie. There's an aspect in that series where you have a mother that's like that towards her son. Literally finds out son is stealing. Finds out that the son tried to sexually molest this girl. He's a good boy. He just didn't have a man around. Are her excuses. Kicks the girl out and blames her. Well, if you weren't dressed like that, then he wouldn't, have tried to get at you. That's belief. And it's belief in the face of facts. Right? And that's the problem with belief, because you can have all the facts right in your face, and yet your belief will supersede those facts. Supersede them. When they send the Artemis 2 up into space next year, they could literally take all the pictures that they want to take. And people are still, yeah, he did need a good ass whooping. And look, y'all don't want to watch TV shows or move with me, because when I see certain things, I be getting mad. I want to go into the screen and beat that boy ass. If I literally saw the actor walking down the street, a part of me would want to punch him in his face. But they could demonstrate that the Earth is a sphere. And you got flat earthers who would be like, hell no. They could demonstrate, and another country went to the moon and then took pictures and showed the artifacts of the 69 landing. People still ain't gonna believe it. They still not gonna believe it. They still gonna hold on to that. There are just certain things that people, if they believe in it, they're not going to change it. Dude, I plan on doing a video about Melchizedek later on today or first thing tomorrow. I'm doing a video about Melchizedek today or tomorrow. So I am not, because you're not about to ruin my video about Melchizedek, king of Salem, who was polytheistic. Well, yeah, polytheistic. All I'm gonna say about Melchizedek right now, just so that this is bait. You see, this is the difference between me and other. I'm telling you right now, Christian, it's bait. It's bait. That Melchizedek was polytheistic, and he worshipped serpents. And Jesus is in the line of the high priest Melchizedek. That's all I'm gonna say. That's all I'm gonna say. So would you say who we call the Anunnaki, or the so-called gods within different religions in the ancient world, like Egyptian, Sumer, Greece, and other places, were made up of good and bad factions? Oh, most assuredly. You see it within their own stories, and it's not so much. It's not so much good and bad factions, right? Good and bad is relative to a certain degree. Was Russia bad? Was the USSR bad and America good during the Cold War? I don't know how old you are, Marcus, but growing up, the USSR was the evil empire. But when I talk to Black people whose family has been in the Soviet Union since the 1930s and earlier, Soviet Union America was the evil empire. When I was there, their history books were different. The Soviet history books portrayed America as being evil. The people who follow the jihadists, America is the evil empire, but we look at the jihadists as they are the evil ones. So did Enki seem like he liked humans more than Enlil? Yes. When you're looking at it from the human perspective, Enki liked us more than Enlil did. So Enlil's the evil guy for us. If you were part of the Igigi or part of certain factions in the Anunnaki, he's the great guy. He's good. He's good to go. So it becomes relative of these factions. So for us as humans, then yeah, Enki is the good guy, Enki is the bad guy. Osiris is the good guy, Set is the bad guy. Even though Set was redeemed and fights alongside of his father Ra against the serpent of the night that tries to swallow the sun. I forgot his name. So in all those stories, yeah, you do have these factions. The one that likes humans the most are the ones that we deem as the good person, the good guy. Unfortunately, we don't have that dichotomy within the Christian Bible or the Abrahamics, because the damn God who's supposed to be the good guy is actually a bad guy. And the one who's a bad guy seems more like the good guy. But we got it confused. Yeah, the Melchizedek came up in some of my rabbit hole yesterday, and I was like, oh, let me do a video about this. The good faction maybe seeded humanity, made them within their likeness, wanted humanity to have knowledge and intellect, while the bad faction wanted humanity to be the slaves, seeing them as gods. Actually, that thought process is going to also be part of my Melchizedek video. But you're absolutely right to a certain extent in that both wanted man to be like themselves. And originally in this story, Enki and Enlil were in lockstep with that. It's just that Enki wanted us to have knowledge, whereas Enlil didn't. Prometheus wanted us to have knowledge, whereas Zeus didn't. So you do have that. Eshu wants us to have knowledge. And then I forgot who on that side didn't want us to have knowledge. You had the two brothers in the Aztecs. One wanted us to have knowledge, the other brother didn't. So that story is repetitive. We have that thing going on. And I was trying to think of the name. Can't think of the name. There's one in the Hindu story that's similar. Like, she was originally sent to kill the demons that was harming men, but then she started killing all the men. But then her husband had to come down and lie down before her in order for her to stop killing all the people. So she is sometimes looked upon as being evil, or she easily becomes evil, and then her husband had to save the humans. Ra's daughter, who is the cat. Damn, I got a mask of her in my meditation room. Ra has a daughter. She's anthropomorphized, but also is a cat, a lioness. And she went on a killing spree as well. First for good, then she started killing people, and then Ra had to pull her back. is Ifa religion to get people to worship the Anunnaki in another form. I actually think that most of these other religions are variations on the Sumerian Kemetic religions. Whether it was intentional, only because you have this thing where the Anunnaki and the Kemetic say that they sent out emissaries to go and restart civilizations around the world, right? Well, let me go back. Before the deluge, Anu broke it up and said, some of y'all go over here, some of y'all go over there, and sent the different Anunnakis to run the individual regions. But then after the deluge, after the deluge, all the Anunnaki came back together. But then emissaries were sent out in the Kemetic and the Anunnaki story, the Sumerian story, for them to go out and restart civilizations. Mainly because, so like in India, in the Indus Valley, Ishtar, she gets the Indus Valley. Well, she has the people out there, but then when the deluge is coming, she comes back and joins the Anunnaki. When she left, she said, I'll send somebody. Same thing with Quetzalcoatl. When he left before the deluge, he said, I'll send somebody. Everybody kept saying they'll send somebody after this deluge because they had told this group of people, go to the top of this mountain. When these group of people go create a boat. And after they survive and after they start proliferating again, then out of the Levant area, and Kemet, they sent out people to go restart these civilizations. In doing that, they're reteaching the same story, but they changed it up a bit. The names changed because the people had, started their own cultures a little bit differently than when they had left. So it could be this form of the same Anunnaki religion mixed in with whatever new variations that they started. Because Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, is very similar to Enki, very similar to Thoth. In the Greek, they call him Hermes. So it's like the same person telling these, doing these stories over again. So I do see that similarity with, I do look at those understandings that those people had at that time. They seem very much like it's the same groups went out there and restarted man's civilization, and they were the same people that had started it from the beginning. And then, of course, when around 6,000 years ago, when it seemed like the Anunnaki all retreated back again, and Anu gave the order to set up kingships within the humans, and that they will rule through puppeting the kingships of the humans, and the Anunnaki kind of fell back again. It's like these religions started taking on new lives of its own, and actually literally moves away from the direct worship of the Anunnaki, because the Anunnakis are not there to be taken care of. And now everything starts to become more ethereal, and it's all like, God is inside of me, and I carry God inside of me instead of being carried in statues and fire or things of that nature. Because no Christian today would say that God comes down and he dwells in my house as a bellowing cloud of fire and all this kind of thing. No, it's a fire burning in my heart. What's the song? Down in my heart, down in my heart. Something down in my heart to stay. Something, whatever that song goes. But it became more of that instead of it being material. And why? Because technology. We start learning more, we start growing more, we start realizing that some of the bullshit that they was teaching back in the day, that they just didn't technologically know these things. But you can find a lot of similarities in Ifa and other religions. Shango and Thor, pretty much same goddamn person, relatively the same person. Thunder gods, one got a hammer, the other one got an axe. But they're warriors and all this sort of thing. You can find those same similarities. Eshu and Loki, trickster gods, except Loki is kind of screwed up. Where Loki tricks you for his own benefit, whereas Eshu tricks you for your benefit. There's a difference. Another one, you've been looking into the Justinians and why it was removed. I haven't researched the Justinians in probably 30 years. I just know the name. I can't tell you nothing about Justinians right now. Who are the Justinians based off of? That based off Justin Martyr? Because it's funny, we call a person who sacrifices themselves for something a martyr. But if you look at Justinian martyr, he killed a lot of people. He killed a whole bunch of people. He was persecuting the shit out of people who didn't follow the orthodoxy of Christianity. So, like, you like Loki, or you saying you laughing at me because I said that Eshu is like Loki? He is. They're very similar. And just like in Ifa, you have Anansi, who's a spider god, and he's a trickster, but he's also a creator god. It's like a combination of other deities in that he creates, and mainly that came out of the spiders create their webs, and that's a form of creation. And then they're also a trickster that tricks people and find into the web. Spiders trick animals, insects find into their web, and then they kill them. But he was also a deity of wisdom, because people looked at spiders as wise, just like people looked at owls and thought owls were wise. Rabbits were fertile, all kind of stuff. Sekhmet, that's the lion chick, right? That's the lion chick who lost her damn mind and started killing everybody. That's crazy because I got a Sekhmet mask in my meditation room, and I have a Sekhmet mask and Kali. Kali is the Hindu version of Sekhmet. I named my street bike Kali because it's a reminder when you ride that bike, keep a level of humility about yourself, because you don't want to ride this bike like you ain't got no humility. Anansi is in Akan, not Ifa. Are you sure? I could swear that Anansi is part of Ifa as well. I don't know. I'm gonna check that one, Skybox. I gotta check that one. Now I could be wrong. I could swear I thought Anansi was part of that. I might need to go back in and make sure I'm spelling it right. Nope. In other aspects of Akan spirituality, Anansi is something considered a trickster and a deity associated with wisdom. All right. You got me. Yep. So, man, I've been throwing Anansi in there with the Ifa people. Yep. Shh. The subgroups of the Fati, the Ashanti, the Akuspim, the Wasa. Okay, all right. Similar to other traditions of Europe and religion. Fine. Thank you for the correction, sir. Thank you for the correction. I was about to be a smart ass. I was about to be a smart ass. That's what I'm saying. Because my man said, he had to ask one more question. Who are the brothers of the White Snake? I was going to say the rock band. Talk about the rock band, the white snake, the white rock band. I don't know of the brothers of the White Snake. The only thing I know about the White Snake is that it was a story written by the Brothers Grimm. They wrote a story called The White Snake, but other than that, I don't know who the brothers of the White Snake are. I know White Snake, the metal band. Yes, I like some certain metal bands. I like a little Metallica. I can get down with Metallica. I think he was East Roman Emperor. Yes. Oh, Justinian, the Roman Emperor Justinian. Because it's Justin Martyr. Sorry, Justin Martyr, but there was a Roman emperor named Justinian. I don't remember much about Justinian. I have to the Roman Emperor Justinian. I have to go back and do some research on that one. He's similar sister tribes. A Nazi. I'm pretty sure there's probably a similarity in a Nazi in the in Ifa, but I just kept putting him in there. And then I remember that time when a Nazi was rocking out with White Snake, it was getting it, boy. And the Brothers Grimm came up and they was like, man, y'all are rocking on. We're gonna write a story about y'all. That's what happened. I'm telling you, that's what happened. That's what happened. Oh man. But yo, it's been great, guys. I do have to get out of here. I know I said I'm gonna stop at 2, but I want to go ahead and I gotta run across town. And I just thought about it's Friday, and if you don't live in Atlanta, you would not understand. But maybe it does same in your city. But Friday in Atlanta, traffic starts earlier. It starts around 3 o'clock, and it just dawned on me that it's traffic gonna start around 3 o'clock. So I'm gonna go ahead and break out of here because I gotta go. Yeah, I gotta run across town a little bit, and I do not like traffic. Y'all don't understand. Your boy has not consistently driven in traffic in like 12, 15 years. So we stays out of the traffic. But I appreciate you guys today. I can't say I know I'm gonna do some videos tomorrow. I don't know if I'm gonna do a live. I know I have some alone time, but I might be hanging out with one of the guys. I might try to go hit some golf balls tomorrow. But I'll definitely produce some more videos today. I'll do a video on Melchizedek today because I actually saw this guy's video and I wanted to expound on his video about Melchizedek, which is what made me want to do a video about Melchizedek. But I also researched Justinian again. I'm pretty sure as soon as I start looking at it, like I told you, my brain is like, I need those spark plugs, and then all this stuff start pouring in. No, I appreciate you guys, Lola, Norman, Skybox, Christian, Debbie, Raquel, everybody. If I ain't name you, everybody, I appreciate you guys. Share the videos. Ethan, if you just not showing up, you're gonna have to go back and watch it because we about to get off. Share the videos. That's what I need you guys to do. That is my call to action. That is going to be my call to action to you guys, is just to share the video. I'm not asking for donations. I'm not asking even y'all to become clients. Just share the video, especially on Facebook, because Facebook is the best one for sharing videos. So if you're on Facebook and you watch a video, share a video. Now, If that video being shared is going to cause you problems with family members or people that are on your page that you don't want to cause problems with, or your job, anything like that, don't share the video. Okay? It's going to cause you problems, don't share it. All right? So when I make these other videos today, if it causes you problems on your job and stuff, don't share it. Cause you problems with your family and you don't want to deal with it, don't share it. But if it doesn't cause you any problem, share the goddamn on videos. And I appreciate you guys, though. I really, really, really do. So I will see you guys in video. If not, I'll see you Monday. But y'all have a great day. And remember, always, you got to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Yep, closing out track. But as soon as I close this out, you can go back and start it over and watch it. Okay? You can watch it. See, somebody always trying to throw me a question right when I'm at the end. And, because I got this thing about me, I have to at least read it. Coach, is it fair to say that the God of the the God of colonialism to Africans, that most Africans have converted to the colonizer's God, also does the God of the master to be the God of the slave? If so, who is God's? Who does this God answer? It is very fair to say that the God of colonialism is the God of the Africans now, because most of the time when somebody colonizes someone else, one of the things that they give them is their God, and they give them a watered down version of that God to maintain control over them, which is what the European colonizers did in the Americas and tried to do in India. It didn't work as well in India, but the Muslims were very much more successful in doing that in India. Didn't work as well in China, but to the Africans that you're speaking of, yes, they gave us their deity and made us slaves to them. And if that deity actually existed, then you would say that that deity answered the colonizers way more so than it answered the prayers of the Africans. And if you think about it, those African slaves and the indigenous slaves in America were more devout towards that deity than the ones who gave them that deity, but yet that deity kept answering them more so, the colonizer more so than the people who was more devout, which really lends to the idea that this deity ain't got shit to do with nothing. Because if he did, then he would have respected the people who were being oppressed more so, and the people who were being more obedient towards him more so than the ones who were not. It's like he favored the bloodshedding ones, but that's the mindset of this deity: more blood, more blood, more blood. And it just comes down, it's the God that's inside each individual person. And unfortunately, that deity is controlled by a larger organization, whether it is corporate, government, or church. And that is what the people will follow. People will follow their culture more than they will follow their religion. They will take the religion and embed it in their culture, make it fit. So they were truly just following their own heart, their own selves, and their own government and religious organizations than they were following some deity. But when you have a deity that says that you can make slaves out of foreigners, then you're good to go. That you can beat them, and as long as they don't die within 2 days, you're good to go. So they're fine. When it says that you can subjugate women in the way that they did, you're fine. You're within the confines of your religion, And people will, if their culture works with that, they're going to keep riding with it. This is why Christians struggle today, and they try to reinterpret the Bible to make it fit into their culture today. But unlike myths that we were talking about earlier, mythologies flow with the culture and changes with the culture, and people are accepting of that. Modern day religions don't do that. And that's why they struggle, is because they don't. I'm gonna make a little segment about that today as well. That's a good little segment. So I gotta go for real. I've been trying to get a consult with you. Thanks. I didn't see it. Oh, you know what? I saw an email and I opened it, but then I got ready to read it, but then life happened and all of that. And so I apologize. I will go and check those emails today, and I'll get back to you, young lady. So that is my apology, because these last 2 weeks have been like, phew, but I got you. Especially this week, I've had like all kind of stuff going on. So my apologies, and you will hear from me today. Okay. If anybody else is interested in private consults, you can go to this website and click on the store, and that's where I do my coaching. No, I know who you are. Wait a minute. We email back and make sure I'm not confusing you with somebody else. Oh, Texas got this. Yeah. Before I go, let me check this out because I want to make sure. Get my life together here. Okay, so yeah, right there. I responded to your last. I responded. Oh, I see what you're saying. So yeah, I switched some things up on the payment system. So give me like 30 minutes and that'll be fixed. Okay. Yeah, I was just about to confuse you with somebody else. Okay, now I got who you are in my head. So it's another person. Hopefully they hadn't seen it that I just set up and said that I opened the email and didn't finish reading it. But I got to read that one too. But give me about 30 minutes and I have that fixed, and then I'm going to run out the door. Actually, I'm going to take me about 10 minutes to fix it, and then I'm running out the door. So, but give it 30 minutes for the cycle up, because I switched the processor, and I did get an email from them today that there was one thing that I left out, and that's why it hasn't been working. But I got you, okay? So y'all have a great day. Remember, always you got to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations, and I got to go.